Shift Happens podcast.
Welcome to Shift Happens, where we dive deep into all things digital transformation in the workplace. In today's episode, we explore the transformative power of technology in the digital workplace with Keshav Puttaswamy, a senior leader from Microsoft, and uncover the key strategies and insights that can help your organization embrace technology and drive success in this rapidly evolving landscape.
Shift Happens podcast. Shift Happens podcast.
Hey Keshav, welcome back. Last we talked, you were hunkered down in your basement, right?
That's right. Yeah, this time I'm in my office, so quite a change.
It's been a couple years, and as always, we're grateful for you to be back. And I'm always excited and impressed when I see your updates on LinkedIn with all the cool stuff you're doing at Microsoft. So perhaps you can share what are some of the stuff you're working on these days, and why all these wonderful new technologies are really shaping the digital work at Microsoft.
Yeah, it's a fun time for sure. I think there's been so much since we last talked, Dux. We went all remote, and now we're entering this hybrid work phase. And so I know that's a big change for myself, but customers that we talk to, they're all kind of figuring out how to make hybrid work. And so that's certainly one of the big things that we're looking at is what are some of the changes we need to do to the workplace, both digital and physical, to enable this new world of hybrid work. And we're learning a lot along the way. And then the other thing I would say is, in the last 3 to 4 months or 6 months, if you will, everyone's talking about AI. And we're really excited about what AI can do to drive employee productivity and employee experiences. And we're looking forward within Microsoft to do that as well.
I mean, this time last year, everybody was talking about the metaverse, right? And now it's AI. I hope this time this will stay.
Yeah, I have a feeling this one's going to stick, but we'll see.
Great. So you talked about physical, right? So, a lot of times when we think about the digital workplace and really ensuring that business still thrives and moves on, everybody thinks it's just everything's online, but you said something about physical. So can you unpack that further, and why does the physical and the digital actually works well together?
Yeah, we've all experienced through the pandemic. We lived in mostly a digital world, and that was amazing in terms of it was amazing to know that we could actually be productive and get a lot of great work done all remote. Internally at Microsoft, we made a big shift to Teams, and that was fundamental to helping us stay productive. But as we kind of come out of the pandemic, we've definitely taken a nuanced approach. And we talk about hybrid. We do still believe the physical workplace and the physical experience is important. As Satya put it, we still think of the physical workplace as the number one collaboration tool that we have. And that's the way I think about the physical workplace. It's just another tool, and it should be used appropriately and effectively to support more of this hybrid work experience. So my favorite example is meeting rooms. And we've seen a huge change in expectations of what meeting rooms needs to be in order to support hybrid. It's funny, we still go back and look at some of the pictures of meeting rooms from pre-pandemic, and they were very optimized for the in-person experience. But now that we've embraced hybrid, we know that we need to evolve our meeting rooms. And so that's just one example, but it extends beyond meeting rooms.
Yeah, that's great, Keshav. Actually, speaking of meeting rooms, Dux and I were talking about the challenge that there is in a shift in the collaboration norm, especially when you're making that transition and learning new technologies, or the impact this has causing the meeting to be run differently, or even having the agenda run differently. Just curious, if you can mention in your experience, how have you seen that shift impact the collaboration between individuals and teams? And do you think that these new shifts negatively impact the continuity of information, or is it the opposite?
Yeah, I think, with any of these transformations, at the heart is the cultural readiness and the cultural shifts that need to happen to do it well. It's not just about tools. And meetings, the same applies. We can talk a lot about meeting room technology and how that can involve, but at the core, it's the people in those meetings and how do they operate? How do they include people that are both in person and remote? And we've had to evolve sort of the practices that we have internally we got all used to raise hands and the meeting chat, and those things are important elements, and we don't want to lose them when we're going back into sort of hybrid work. So being very intentional about how do we make sure that we still have the same level of inclusivity, making sure they get to speak. But speaking of continuity, I think what we've really unlocked is uh, the ability for more and more of these meetings to happen, not just synchronously, but asynchronously as well. We're also with meeting recordings, and those are great for people that are like, for example, we have a team in India, and when our meetings are at 2 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time, not so great for India. However, recordings can really help there. But we're taking that one step further. I think as we're seeing AI come in, things like meeting recap, quick summarization, it's really freeing up people to say, yeah, it's okay if I don't attend the meeting. And oh, I actually don't have to watch the full 60-minute recording. I can get the highlights really quickly. I can actually get the pieces that I want. And so from that perspective, we're really it's freeing us up to think very differently about our meetings and what it means to make sure that everyone's voice is heard in a conversation.
So, Keshav, along that lines, right? This is really cool and a great point to bring up. But I want to go back to the point you made is about culture, it's about people. So, does this have to do with recalibration there? So, for example, in this case, do we have to retrain people on how to do meetings, like how you should write agenda or how you should behave during a meeting or action items? Do you provide that type of specific guidance?
We have provided guidance for sure. It's one of those things where, in the ideal scenario, we those are things that are just become obvious in the product. And so, yes, we'll do some training. We have some great hybrid meeting guides for our employees, and we do that. And we also see a big part of that is how leaders run their meetings. So when leaders sort of establish a certain way of running a meeting, it turns out it becomes a lot easier. Everyone starts following that model. And so we are pretty targeted in terms of how we train our folks instead of, putting everyone through some kind of training course, which becomes really hard. How do we do it in a more thoughtful, organic way where an employee just kind of assimilates that information without having to go through any kind of major training? So we look for those kinds of opportunities. But I also think that technology can really help here. So we're seeing that, with things like agenda, for example, a big part of meetings is of having a great feedback loop. Like, was that a good meeting? We're going to have lots of meetings. How do we get that feedback loop going so that as an organizer, I know when I didn't do certain things right? So some of us internally at Microsoft, we see a little feedback that comes at the end of a meeting for the participants. And they're able to say, how did this meeting go? What did you like? Did it have an agenda? Were people able to participate? And that feedback goes back to the meeting organizer through what we call insights, Viva Insights. So you get this kind of feedback loop. And a lot of times we find that that's a more effective way to drive change than to try and take on a big sort of training exercise.
Well, you speak about something that didn't exist prior to us getting used to meeting virtually, this idea of feedback or insights. Before, you just sort of weren't even thinking about it, getting to a meeting with your colleagues, and oftentimes probably spend the first 20 minutes not really on the matter that you're really supposed to discuss. So the feedback element of it, I think, is important. Working off that idea, do you think AI now is going to actually amplify the feedback concept for virtual and physical meetings?
Yeah, I think that first of all, that in one-on-one connection is really important. And the question is, that time is limited, and so how do we use that time in the most productive way? One of the things that we believe is that the more we can use that time together, time to drive connection, that's going to pay off a lot more than sort of tactical. Let's go through, sort of updates and so on. And those are good. I'm not saying we shouldn't have those, but a lot of times, in meetings that I'm in, we actually try not to rush through those little pleasantries that we do at the beginning of the meeting. Those are actually really important. They establish and strengthen connection with the team. So instead of cutting those things short, uh, let's actually use our time to get to know, hey, how did it go? How was your Memorial Day weekend? You know, that is actually really important, and we want to ideally have more time for the personal side of it, and then use Copilot or AI to help us through some of the things that are more sort of tactical that just need to be done, but can be done in so much more effective, sort of concise way. And I think that if we do that, and this is a theory because we're still early days, we're going to see how this plays out. But I feel that our meeting time will be a lot more engaging. People will appreciate being in those meetings more, and then they still feel like they're not missing out because they can easily catch up on all the details afterwards. Like I was in a meeting today, and we ended up spending a little bit more time at our LT staff meeting on sort of talking about how things went over the weekend, and we had like a budget item in our agenda. We never got to that. It's kind of important, but we knew that we'll take care of it offline, and that's okay. And so it's a bit of being deliberate about what's the highest value for the group and ensuring that we use that time effectively.
Yeah, I like the point you address of making sure the connection's there. I think ultimately communication starts with personalities getting along and finding almost that the ideation is happening, that there is good chemistry, and that the team camaraderie is developing. The task-oriented meetings tend to be too dry. People won't speak up as much, especially if you're doing a hybrid type meeting. But I guess the impact we should be looking for is walking out of the meeting feeling like something was accomplished and we understand the next steps.
Yeah, definitely. There's always a balance. I'm not suggesting all our meetings just become social hour, but it's a balance. And again, getting to crisp agenda, helping us identify what are the action items, making sure we can follow up on those effectively. I mean, those are huge opportunities for AI to play a role and free us up from those kind of tasks so that we can focus on more of the creative side, more of the collaboration side of things.
Keshav, beyond meetings, so this is really cool where there's a feedback loop now. It's kind of like a customer satisfaction, right? Like CSAT that we do or NPS score, digital workplace activities as well. And if you do, how do you do that? What kind of metrics do you track on a day-to-day basis?
Well, there's one of those things when we think about employee productivity, trying to measure productivity is a bit of a holy grail, and perhaps maybe not the most productive use of our time because it really is such a hard thing to fully quantify. There's so many aspects to it. That said, there are things that we look at. So first of all, from a more longer term perspective, and we don't ask our employees this all the time, but it's on a 6 monthly cadence. We've been measuring essentially employee satisfaction around our digital tools and collaboration. And we have for example, when we went into all remote work, we saw a big shift in that number in interesting ways. And it was really insightful to see how that played out. But that's just something that holds us accountable because at the end of the day, we can offer all the technology we want. But the question is, can employees get their work done and how do they feel about how productive they are? And so we have a way of measuring that. And then when we get down to individual sort of scenarios or objectives that we have, maybe we want to improve the meeting room experience, or we want to improve, how connection happens, or live large meetings, for example. Then we have some more specific measures that we aim for that particular initiative, and we kind of hone in on certain things. Sometimes it's in product, so like the meeting effectiveness, for example, are signals we look at. We also look at, for example, how interactive meetings are in general. So we see how many times people are raising hands or how many voices in the room are speaking. And those are interesting metrics because if those things are shifting where we see more people interacting, that's a good thing. We look at sort of the holistic view because that's a good way of measuring the overall pulse of the employees and their experiences. And then when we take individual experiences that we're rolling out, we have more targeted measures to see how we're doing on those fronts.
And I'm sure a lot of your findings too and learnings, you share this with customers, right? And you share this with the product teams. And I suspect like the work trend index report that comes out every year, I'm sure there's some elements of your learnings that shared into those avenues as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The Work Trend Index is, as you know, a pretty global study. So, but we definitely share out our own learnings that we're seeing internally. We put them out on. We have this thing called Inside Track, where we're constantly publishing new data about what's working within Microsoft, or how we getting success with, or learning from, perhaps with different experiences, across our various collaboration scenarios.
What do you think are the additional enablement technologies that can drive better engagement and experience when it comes to either meetings? Is it another communication tool? Is it better integration of where you communicate on a one-on-one and where you communicate with the whole team? Or is it still somewhat a fragmented experience for end users?
Yeah, we all know we're bombarded with so many different communication medium, and so that's been a constant battle, if you will, to help employees kind of stay. Sometimes I don't know if you're like this, but I remember something, somebody's told me this thing, but I don't remember where it was it in Teams, was it an email, and then go hunting around for that. So there's definitely lots of efforts to help simplify, what those are. You're never gonna, we don't believe, replace anyone. There's not one size fits all, or one communication tool that's going to rule them all. But we do believe that simplifying the experience, so that as a user, I feel more confident and comfortable about where to go to communicate. And also, I think the flip side is also, as a leader who's trying to communicate to their organization, what's the best way to do that? Should I send it out to everybody? Should I make a post on Viva Engage, what used to be Yammer? What are the best ways to kind of really communicate those out? And so we've been working on a few different areas here to simplify that. I mentioned a couple of tools here. We're really honing in on tools like Viva Engage and Viva Amplify, and making it possible for the leader to figure out what is the message that they want to communicate, and who they need to get it out to, and then not worrying so much about all the details of how to send that out. The tool will help figure out, okay, hey, we can get this out in email. Maybe it needs to be in a Teams channel that needs to get out there. And then, more importantly, going back to that feedback loop, as a leader, how do I know, are people reading my mail? Is actually landing with the audience that I've targeted? And so also providing insights for leaders to understand whether the message that they're trying to communicate out is being heard or not, um, is equally important.
Well, the biggest risk, as you said before, it's not just where you find that message, but the influx of all these channels of communication, which are creating a fragmented experience. And this can be difficult for organizations that are struggling to make the change in mobilizing their workforce into adopting new tools for communication. This is where the struggle lies, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from your view, let's use the example where a part of the organization is using Viva Engage and another part of the organization is more comfortable using email. Do you believe this will cause risk to the continuity of communication?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we believe is we got to meet users where they are. And we're really thoughtful. At the end of the day, we want to put our employees at the center. And if we have to force something, then there's probably a problem, because it needs to be something that employees want. And so, how do we ensure that we're not being overly disruptive? So, transformation doesn't necessarily require us to get everyone to do something differently. How can we meet them in a place where they're comfortable with, and bring them along the journey? So I think in this example, um, how do we allow somebody, let's say a leader, to use Viva Engage, for example, but know that even if their employees are in email, that their message will reach them, without also being aware that we don't want to spam the employee. We don't want to, create like a lot of noise in their so how do we manage that appropriately, so that it's a win-win? The leader gets to land the message that they need to, but the employees are still able to receive it in a place that they're comfortable with. So I think it's finding that balance. And I think where a lot of times it's about making sure that we understand what is it in it for the employee. How do we make it something that they would want as opposed to something that they're required to do? And then thinking very deliberately about what is that, but how do we not lean on the training part? How do we lean on the natural incentives that people have? And I think we if we can distill it down to that, oftentimes we'll have more success than some kind of heavy lift in terms of training.
Around this, right? There's a lot of work and a lot of exciting work that's coming ahead, especially in this digital workplace. Despite the doom and gloom sometimes we see in the news, what what's keeping you excited these days, Keshav, in terms of the work you do internally at Microsoft and a lot of these technologies that are coming together to evolve the digital workplace?
Well, I got to say, I'm really excited about what AI can do for us. I think it's a pretty. We're still in the early days, but when I think about what AI can do, we think about the amount of work that we spend just managing the work as opposed to doing the work. I think there's just a lot of opportunity there for AI to simplify all of that, help us. And I love how we talk about a co-pilot. It's not, autopilot, as in it just goes and does things. It's really there as an assistant to help me be more effective, to remove or not have to have me worry about a lot of the things that might have kept me up at night earlier, which is, did I respond to the right people? How do I catch up on all these meetings that are going on? If I can do that, across several meetings in a day, and I don't feel like I have to be in all the meetings, um, then I've created space for myself and perhaps for my team.
That's great to hear. We're also equally excited about everything you've mentioned and the opportunity that we see in the eagerness for customers and a lot of partners that we work with to really adapt and want to start experimenting. I wonder how much of the change that we're going to experience will end up forcing an operational change in the way businesses conduct themselves with the workforce and their supply chain partners. Can you maybe share any recent story where you saw hesitation in what AI could bring to the organization, where either leaders or members that were trying to make a decision on implementing a capability were hesitant because of those risks that they have yet to fully understand?
It's a great question. I feel like we're so much in the early days that it's hard for me to like give a direct story within Microsoft because quite honestly, I can't think of a great one where that's been an issue. It's been almost always on the other end of the spectrum. Oh, look, this is going to free us some more time, so we can, be more productive. Becoming a distraction or taking us away or focus away from what's important. Right now, we're still discovering what is possible with AI. Once we get past that, I think we might encounter more of these scenarios, but I suspect they're a little bit more of a future problem as opposed to a challenge we're facing today.
So, for a lot of our listeners, a lot of people are excited about the possibilities of AI, innovations in the cloud. What's a good place to start, right? Because meaning, we work with a lot of customers. You work with internal and external customers. Is cloud is already table stakes. We're already there. But it seems like a lot of organizations are looking for the next thing before AI, because AI is there, but it's still not there for a lot of organizations. So, what are some of the quick wins that organizations can take advantage of?
We all have through the pandemic kind of shifted our digital HQ or our HQ into the digital world. I think that's pretty transformative, and we went through that journey with Teams, for example. I think that uh, in that process, trying to think what getting those basic sort of pieces together. And we've been on this drive. We've got an initiative which we call it's a feature in OneDrive called known folder moves or mapping. I think it's one of the two. Actually, KFM is how we refer to it, and it's basically taking all your documents that are in and putting it in the cloud and making it easy so that when you email it, it's automatically in the cloud. The more you do those kinds of things, the more you're going to enable or be ready for taking advantage of some of the new capabilities around AI. Because AI can do really amazing things when it can actually, access that information for you and be able to use it. So I think there's some groundwork there. So it's not just about moving to the cloud. It's also really making sure that you're getting your data in there. You're using the tools in the right way. So, for example, using SharePoint effectively, using Teams and channels. We still see, people still using chat a lot, and there's nothing wrong with group chat, but using channels so that they can take advantage of all of the capabilities and collaboration that the channels can provide, I think is another example. Share channels. Think about when you're collaborating with external companies. We typically we would have emails being sent around and documents being sent around, and shared channels across companies can be pretty effective and a pretty transformative way of collaborating with other customers. So I think that those set of things are all great places to start, and it will set you up as a customer to take advantage of that next stage of innovation.
Even around the example we shared around leadership, using things like Viva Engage as a way to communicate and engage. And with Copilot coming in, I saw a video where you can even write the message for you, right? So things like that, I think, are quick hits that organizations can take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Viva Engage is a great example. And there's a few other aspects there too, Viva Connections, to kind of organize all of the content that you have for your employees.
Keshav, what do you think is the best recommendation to give folks when they're thinking about making those shifts to be more comfortable with either AI embedded capabilities or even changing their mode of communication?
Yeah, one of the things that we do internally, we call it rings, but any of the changes that we roll out, we do it in stages. So we take a small group, and oftentimes we look at champions. We're a big company, 200,000 plus employees spread across 100 plus countries, and there's a lot of nuances to the different kind of needs across geos and functions and so on. And so the way we think about it is a lot of times it's hard to predict what a particular change, what impact it's going to have. How do we actually get the engagement and adoption? And so the way we think about it, we have these rings that we set up, and we start small and try out some of the changes. We are probably going to be a little bit more white glove service in that regard. We're really paying close attention to what's working, what's not working, and having that feedback loop. Then we build out a community of champions. We have this thing internally we call Elite, but these are actually employees that have said, "Hey, I'm really interested in trying new things early, and count me in." And so we use them as effectively our champions on the ground. So we often take some of these changes to them as the next stage and get them comfortable and familiar, so that they can then, once it starts rolling out, this does two things. One, we catch things before it hits 200,000 employees. So it's a lot easier to change things when it's like 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees. So we do that. And then once we are ready to take it all out across the globe, we have champions who understand this really well and really are going to be the feet on the ground, talking and really driving the change within their teams or organizations.
I love that. It's like amplify the message and stages with your agents out on the field. That's great.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is, stakeholders and getting their buy-in is really important. So we want to make sure there's good alignment of what we're trying to do with what the business is trying to do. And the way we do that, we ensure that it's clear what are the benefits? Why are we doing this? We're not just doing this because there's a new technology and we think it's cool, so let's go try it out. It's really about driving some business value. And so helping our stakeholders understand what that value is, because a lot of times we know that some of this change is, one step back to take two steps forward. And so it's important that our stakeholders understand what is the goal, what are we trying to accomplish, and so that when the things are in progress, that we continue to have their support, and that they know that this isn't the finish line. This is a step towards the ultimate goal, and so they are also bought in, so that when we hit some turbulence, which often happens with change, we have we have the right way of measuring how much impact we're having and that it's not disruptive, but also making sure that we get the support so that, our business stakeholders know and will continue to support some of that change as we kind of push through that turbulence, if you will.
One thing that how you describe this model, Keshav, clearly highlights that this is a journey. Digital transformation is a journey. It's not a destination, right? It's this model around sustainability. You see, in the past, oftentimes people think of IT. Oh, we're going to roll out the new version of SharePoint, and then we'll see you again in 3 years, right? But that's not the case anymore with the constant innovation and opportunities we have. Truly, technology or the technology team are true partners of the business, and I think that's a major shift that a lot of organizations are going through and understanding that needs to happen to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's important to invest in some of those mechanisms because, as you said, Dux, change it's not a one-time thing. We're constantly going to have change, and so having some good mechanisms in place, some good processes in place, so that we can reuse and rinse and repeat a little bit on the tools and the process, even though the technology or whatever it is might be different. So we have these frameworks that we've established that allow us these rings, elite users, our champions, these communities it's important that we continue to invest in that because we're going to use that time and time again as new changes come along.
This has been an awesome conversation, Keshav. We can keep going. But before we wrap up, we like to end our podcast with a very clear takeaway for our listeners on how to deal with all these changes and shifts happening around them. So when it comes to ensuring their business continues to grow and thrive within this digital workplace transformation, what do you recommend for those who want to make this shift happen, really to embrace technology and drive success in their digital workplace?
Well, I think the one thing I would say is start small and just make sure that things work before going fast. That way, we talked about rings, we talked about champions. These are good things to do, and oftentimes we want that quick feedback loop because it really if you can get it right in a smaller audience and you build some confidence, then you can go fast.
Well said, Keshav. Yeah, I agree with Dux. We could definitely go on much longer. Learned a lot during this conversation, and it's exciting to hear the work you and your teams are doing. Thanks for your time.
Shift Happens Podcast.
Thanks for listening. In this episode, we learned from Keshav that embracing technology in the digital workplace is crucial for success. Start small and validate before scaling up. Leverage AI as an assistant to simplify work processes. Use champions and engagement rings for change management. Focus on stakeholder buy-in and alignment, and view digital transformation as an ongoing journey rather than a destination. If you like today's episode, subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll see you next time.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.